What else? Yep.
If you're going to talk about migrants, can you address Pope Leo's proclamation recently and how Italy is responding to that statement?
Okay.
How the current administration in the US is going to interact with the EU as well as Europe as a whole.
Okay, that's a very good question. Okay, what else? Yep.
Yeah, Italy's role in the security of the EU.
Okay, that's good. Does Italy have any role in security? Does the EU have any role in security? That's a little bit the question. All right. But you did touch at some of the main issues of today. So as I said, Italy is part of the European Union, but the European Union in turn is formed by 27 member states, right? And those member states are different, right? We are Wyoming, Colorado, we are landlocked states, for instance. Probably we are less concerned about hurricanes than Florida, right? But we are concerned by droughts, which Florida is not, right? So our geographical position has an influence on us. Of course, our resources have an influence on us. Here in Wyoming, we have oil and a lot of wind power, I see. A lot of it. Other states do not have it. So for instance, if you go to, and the same is in Europe. In Europe, we have most countries are energy dependent, right? There are basically two countries only that are three countries that are independent energetically. You know which ones?
Norway.
Norway is not a member of the European Union, but yes, it's independent energetically. Yes. No.
France.
France, yes, correct. Why?
Nuclear.
Exactly. They have nuclear power, and also they are the only one that have not only the ability to have nuclear power, they have the ability to reprocess uranium to create power. Yes. So France, what else?
Denmark.
Denmark, exactly. Why?
Wind.
Wind and renewables. Yeah, and there is another one that has wind and renewables and is energetically independent. Portugal. Lots of wind power, right? But the others are energetically dependent, right? Which means they have to buy their energy somewhere, and the more the energy costs, the more it costs to produce. And the more it costs to pay your bills. You know, European parents are always running after their kids to switch off the lights. When you have American guests, it's like, switch off the lights, don't keep air conditioning on. It's like, this is gonna ruin us, please, right? And this has been a problem of late. I'll go into that. Other problems that emerge, migration, where the migrants come from. Syria, yep. Northern Africa, yes. Africa, Central Africa, Africa in general, yes. Where else? Still people in Afghanistan, yep. So which countries do you think are more exposed to migrants? Italy, yes. Greece. So Italy and Greece and partially Spain are the countries where all the migrants go. So it's a burden on these countries to process the migrants. But then actually, it's also a problem of Germany, for instance, a problem of Sweden, because they tend to go to countries where there are lots of more social benefits. So, but yes, of course, for the South, migrants is a big problem. And if you go at the East, what is the problem? Ukraine, right? Because why? But also why? Because war, yeah.
And the jobs.
And the jobs, but also because of history. right? So the European Union is 27, but they have a very different geographical, natural resources, political, history, backgrounds. Right? And that has always been there, but is particularly a problem today. So the first problem in Europe today is that Europeans are not able to speak on one voice. And they're too little to matter alone of international scene. So they're confronted with a lot of problems from all sides, but they are unable to respond. All right. So this is, and what is the consequence?
No response.
No response. What do you think the citizens think?
Can't hear you.
What do you think the citizens think about
If the EU's ineffective.
it? They use ineffective. What do you think they think when they pay more for bills, for instance? Are they happy?
No.
No, they're not. So just a little bit to make you think that the situation in Europe is not the best. All right, so let's do a step back and to understand what is going on. After the Second World War, actually by the end of the Second World War, the leaders of the UK, USSR, and US met together at Yalta. What did they decide?
By the euro.
Spheres of influence.
Spheres of influence, divide the world. US get Latin America, USSR get Eastern Europe. The British, I'm not sure they got anything out of it except of a place at the table which boosted their confidence, since at the time they still saw themselves as an empire, right? So for 70 years, Europe, 50 years. My math is, 50 years, Europe was divided into two parts, right? Western Europe, including Italy, which played a very pivotal role. Why? Why was during the Cold War Italy important?
Basis.
Bases, yes, but why did we have a base? So for instance, bases in Germany, at any given time in Germany during the Cold War, there was 1 million soldiers stationed in Germany, way more than in Italy, but that was because of Eastern Germany, right, in defense. Why was Italy never had 1 million, but it has important bases. What was Italy's relevance?
It's in the water. It had all of the naval bases.
Exactly, it's in the middle of the Mediterranean. So it border east on one side, but also it is all the naval bases, Napoli, for instance, right?
Right.
So Italy during the Cold War had an important role because of its geopolitical position. It was never a big country, a strong country, but it had its position granted. Let's put it this: its position in Mediterranean granted it a place at the table, right? And of course, everybody wants to come to Italy, so Italy got into the G8,
And it had the best food.
it has the best food. So leaders. When I was an advisor to the foreign minister, I used to say, Italy stays in the G8, now the G7, not because we are relevant, we're not relevant anymore, the Cold War is over, but people want to come to Italy, good food, a good wine, and this meeting is this beautiful place, so they're not kicking out just because they want to come here in Frankfurt. What are you doing? We are relevant, so Frankfurt, we're not relevant, but people like us, right? So it benefited of a geopolitical position, and also because it had a very strong communist party, it played a best way to describe it, Italy's foreign policy, wishy-washy foreign policy, two ways to measure. It always was a bridge, not only geographically, but it was a bridge toward Russia. Now, we had to have relationship with Russia because of a strong communist party. Middle East. We had both pro-Palestine and pro-Israel people, right? So Italy, well, we have a church in Italy. So Italy played during the Cold War a lot of soft diplomacy. Question up to here. Please feel free to interrupt me anytime to ask questions, right? Fast forward to 1989, what happens? War. All right. Now, when I started teaching, which was a little bit later than that, I remember that I used to refer to November 9, 1989, as the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of communism. I remember my American students were like, no, we won, that this is the year we won the Cold War. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Nobody won, it ended, right? So that there were different interpretations. For the Europeans, it was the end of the natural division. It's like you have a wall and you can't go to Colorado, right? And we had no clue of what was, unless you were a communist leader, and then you had been there, otherwise you had no idea, right? So for Europeans, it was the end of a natural division. For the US, it was a victory against their against the enemy. And a lot of trouble will come from these different interpretations. And then the Eastern Europeans that are freed are really mad at the Western Europeans, really mad. It's like, oh, we tried to rebel, you did nothing, which is technically true. We did nothing, but so did the US or nobody else, or the UK, because that was what had been decided at Yalta, right? And the Eastern Europeans were poor, they had everything to rebuild. Germany is reunified, which at the time, leaders at the time were old enough to remember World War II. United Germany, it brought a little chill. And it's like, so the idea was, okay, and Kohl made it very clear, Germany is going to reunify, whether you like it or not, right? So better come with me. So, but Kohl also knew his people, so the decision was yes to united Germany in a stronger Europe, in a Europe that would have a foreign policy, it would take a while, would have a European currency, would take a step forward towards becoming a federation, right? It didn't quite work out the way we thought at the time, but that would be a little bit going into too much into the details. But suffice to say that Eastern Europeans, first thing they wanted to do was like, we want to join, we want to become of the European Union, and the Western Europeans are like, yeah, not so quick, right? We have to reform first. Also, they had to reform first because they didn't have a market economy. They had to build the democracies. They had to, what technically is called implement EU law. So basically any piece of legislation, and there are lots of legislation in the European Union that had been created, they have to transpose it into their national system, right? So it couldn't be done like this. It had to take time, right? And the EU put a lot of money into there, but it created frustrations. Like, hey, you kept us waiting in the dark for 50 years and now you don't want us. So there were lots of friction and translations. And then that created an opportunity for the US. Who was president at the time?
What years?
92, 93, 94. Clinton, but Bush at the end, but after 92.
Yeah.
So Clinton, who was Clinton Secretary of State?
That was over.
Margaret Albright. Where is Margaret Albright from?
Romania.
Czechoslovakia. So
Somewhere.
yeah, somewhere there,
Somewhere over there.
right? So she could still speak Czech. Of course, she came to the US as a girl, but she still had that background. So they saw an opportunity. Let's offer them NATO. And that was probably a big problem, a big mistake, because the USSR had dismantled with Warsaw Pact, there was no reason for NATO to continue to exist. Or if we wanted to do it, we should have reformed it. And probably included Russia, which at the time was imploding, losing pieces, was really weak, and would have taken anything we would have given them. We lost a huge, huge historical opportunity. We're talking before the table. I'm part of the generation who thought, wow, end of the Cold War, we're gonna be in a peaceful world. You know, we were so lucky to grow up on those years. We had high hopes for our future. Oh boy, we were wrong. But there was a huge historical mistake there, right? And so the Eastern Europeans are included in NATO. Slowly, Russia gets back on his feet. Putin gets at the leadership. And Russia, it's one of those countries that perceive itself as an empire, right? Others in Europe include the UK or the French, even the small Belgians used to see themselves as an empire, but Russia perceived itself. And at that point, they started to see NATO as an antagonistic power. We lost our chance of world peace, right? Slowly, the Eastern Europeans are integrated into the EU. NATO slowly moves toward East. Now, when we did the first enlargement of NATO, Czech, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, there was a gentleman agreement. And the gentleman agreement was that NATO would not, which was between Clinton and Yeltsin, that NATO would not expand farther east. And then we renegated and renegated and renegated. Now, foreign policy, it's based on words, on trust. We can do diplomacy. The basis for diplomacy is establishing mutual trust. Who remembers the Cuban crisis? Okay, how did the Cuban crisis, we went this close to nuclear disaster. How was the Cuban crisis ended?
With our missiles.
The Russians pulled back.
Yep. So with Russians withdraw their missiles in Cuba because we would have not allowed missiles so near to our border. That should tell something. And in change, we took away our missiles from Turkey. Only that was not made public. That was based on word, mutual trust, right? So they were examples. So that word was renegated and renegated and renegated over and over. Meanwhile, countries like Italy exploded as well, right? Because countries that had a strong communist party like Italy, all of a sudden there's no communism anymore, right? So the whole system, political system, explodes, right? And Italy enters into a phase where somehow they lost their raison d'être, their reason to be. The Mediterranean at the time was Pacific, not anymore. But at the time, the Mediterranean was not really a problem. So covering that flank, Eastern Europe was not communist anymore. So that flank was the system is exploded. New people with zero experience. The whole political class is wiped out overnight, basically, completely overnight. New leader with zero experience emerged, right? And the country somehow loses relevance, really loses its, who are we? What do we do? I mean, are we really part of the G7, just G8, just because they like our food, right? And a new leader emerges, which is Berlusconi, which in retrospect today, looking at the leaders we have, was one of the biggest statesmen ever. For the little domestic history, ring some bells, you know, when Berlusconi emerged, the left was like, oh, it's gonna last a few months and he will be gone. He has been the person who's been in power the longest, the second one, the milk pit, right? And so that didn't work out well. It also led, the rise of Berlusconi also led to an end of the progressives. No more communists. The former communists had to redefine themselves, and instead of redefining themselves on the basics of progressive policies, I mean, they defined themselves in opposition to Berlusconi. We are against Berlusconi, point. So politics in Italy sucked for a long time, and the rest of Europe held a little bit better, but it was a period of changes. Questions? Because I had to remember to put in Italy from time to time, and I lost my train of thought.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
So NATO, was it obvious at the time that expanding NATO as opposed to deconstructing NATO was a good idea? Were they doing the best they could at the time, or was it an obvious mistake?
It was a huge mistake. So
But did they know that at the time? Is it only in retrospect that it was a?
So
Yeah.
there is, say in Italian, let's see if I'm able to translate it. Thinking, pensar male, thinking, how to say, pensar male, thinking tricky is a sin, but often you're right. So at the beginning, the discussion was, let's dismantle NATO and make it a peacekeeping operation. So something called PFP, Partnership for Peace, was created. And PFP was enlarged to everyone. Swiss and Russia were part of PFP, right? I remember going to visit NATO with my students from study abroad in Florence, and you see the generals, and they're like, they have daisies in their hair, and it's like, more anymore. We're making love now. We're bringing this like, I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So that was where we went at first, right? But then it was an opportunity. The reality is that on the one side, the US always wanted Europe to pay more of the defense share, right? It has been very convenient for Western Europe. You know, the US has been paying our defense for 50 years, and we could invest in social welfare, in education, in health. You know, we don't have to worry because the US is paying and doing it all, not for us. So the US has always wanted Europe to do more, right? But with more, it meant exactly what Trump is doing now, having the European pay for it, not be responsible for it, not be the principal for it, right? And the first thing that Germany did when it unified is like, okay, the 1 million soldiers in our bases, off you go, out. Which we say, oh, okay, we spare a lot of money, but it also meant that Europe wanted to be its own principal in defense, whether it was capable or not, that is another story. I don't think it was capable, right? But that was the impression. So enlarging NATO to Eastern Europe meant creating 4 very, very, very grateful states, right? As I said, Yalta was not decided by the Western Europeans, except for the British. Right, was decided by the Russian, the British, and the Americans. So technically, the Eastern Europeans should have been angry at the British and the Americans, but instead they were angry at the Western Europeans. So it was a very smart move to create a shift of loyalty in Eastern Europe. The Eastern Europeans were looking at the European communities as their main goal, but they were given NATO very quickly. So it was a shift in loyalty, which created a new level of influence of the US in Europe. I don't know if they understood they were making a mistake at the time. I know for sure, because I interviewed people who were in the room, they would say, I know for sure that there was a gentleman agreement, right? That was there. So, but I mean, it was from an American point of view, it was a smart thing to do. Now, whether it was good for the rest of the world, that is another question, right? I still think we should have enlarged to Russia. Create something completely new, a new kind of alliance, because don't forget, we don't talk about it, but there is someone far east even today, right? And I think we felt too self-secure at the time and made mistakes. Other questions? So finally, by the time the Eastern Europeans joined the EU respectively in 2004 and 2006, most of them were already into NATO and were loyal more to NATO than to the EU. Plus, at the beginning, they didn't speak the languages. The reality is that in most meetings, the languages that are translated are English, French, and German, right? Only at the level of head of states and government, we have all the languages. So these people were raised learning Russian. They can speak English or French. So at the beginning, that was also very unpolite of the Europeans, right? Extremely unpolite. It was good because then you have less, you have 27, but technically of the 27, 10 can't really talk because they don't know the language. So it created further frustration there and say, hey, now remember, we can't even talk because we don't speak the language. Mind you that Italians as well can speak the language, but that's another story. And Italian diplomats at least can. Right? So when they joined, they were really upset by that point and ready to take anything the US would have given. So it created a division between East and West. You have the same in Germany. Even today, there is a lot of reciprocal resentment. Even today, in West Germany, they say that Eastern Europeans, they don't work enough and they live on our social welfare, and the Eastern Europeans and Eastern Germans, they say, oh, the Western Germans earn much more than us. I mean, we have similar dynamics in Italy for completely different reasons. The South is so much poorer, very beautiful, but much poorer, and lots of people travel north and move north. So there are internal dynamics within all member states. Questions? While I recuperate my train of thought. So, yeah.
You're giving a lot of emphasis to the Kyoto Agreement, but wasn't that essentially forced by the military position of the relative forces at the end of World War II, that the Russians had conquered Eastern Europe and they were going to keep it?
Yeah, no, of course. Of course, and the way the Warsaw, for instance, was treated, it's all part of that. I mean, I'm just saying that there was a division of the world, and that was it for the next 50-something years, right? And that was particularly evident in Europe and created different histories, right? So now we go to the next part. When Russia started to assert itself again under Putin, Putin came clearly with an imperialistic view and project. I'm gonna make Russia great again, right? That, of course, was received very differently in Eastern Europe, where they still had the experience, than in the rest of Europe, right? And I think that the problem of Western Europeans is that they didn't, as I said, they didn't listen to them. They sort of thought, oh, we have to give all this money to these people, They didn't listen to their concerns. They didn't do anything to integrate Eastern Europe, to listen to their concern, to find ways. For instance, very little emphasis was given to the equivalent of Article 5 of NATO. We have a very similar agreement. It is in our article. If one country is attacked, then the others have to retaliate. But there wasn't given enough emphasis. So there were lots of. The point is that there were lots of misunderstanding, lots of like families when we don't resolve issues, right? And then we get together for Thanksgiving and we fight. right? And the Europeans don't get together for Thanksgiving, they get together for Council of Ministers and they fight. Yeah, that's exactly this. So the thing is that, the point is that we, because of Yalta, we had very different histories, very different feelings, very different perceptions of reality, which are playing today, right? When the migrant crisis happened after Libya, the Eastern Europeans couldn't budge. It's like, oh, that's your problem. Not us, they're not coming to us. Poof, we don't care. Clearly, they were not going to, right? We don't care. We give asylum to 0 people, whether you like it or not, right? And when Russia started to push, the Western European is like, oh, that's your problem, it's not ours, right? So they couldn't understand each other concerns until when the Biden administration came in. So first, the Libya war, big mistake. Why it was a big mistake? In addition to Iraq and Afghanistan, but why specifically Libya? To begin with, it's a failed state today. I mean, the idea, I don't know if you remember Obama's speech in Cairo, where he said democracy is gonna be for everyone. And then this poor kid, poor vendor set himself on fire in Tunisia because he couldn't have a license to sell. And that brings the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring has been collective hallucination, right? Because Europe and the US are like, wow, the Arabs are gonna become democratic. Now, if you study democracy, and comparatively, democracy cannot be exported unless you've lost a war badly. The only two cases where democracy was exported is Germany and Japan, who were annihilated after World War II. Not even Italy. Italy was a loser, but technically changed side because this is what Italy does. It changes, it looks little bit into the war, and then it's like, we're gonna lose it. Okay, here we come, Americans, we are on your side, right? And but there was a domestic process there. So only 2 cases after annihilation, democracy could have been exported. All the others, it has to be homegrown. So thinking that in the Arab state we could export democracy was wishful thinking, hallucination, whatever you want to call it. And the reality of fact is that all those countries are, the authoritarian regime are way worse today than they were before the Arab Spring. Now, Libya comes in here. Now, Libya is a former Italian colony. All right? Well, Italy, both Italy and Germany during Nazi and fascism, they realized, oopsie, we don't have colonies. Even small Belgium had colonies, and we don't. We want colonies as well, no colonies, no matter, no worse stage. So they quickly got whatever they could get. I mean, Italy got Albania, got Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Libya, all right? And then both the center right and the center left negotiated, actually started the center left and the center right finished it, negotiated a friendship treaty with Libya. And the friendship treaty put black on white that colonialism was wrong, that Italy was going to repay Libya for colonialism, which of course came in the form of investment in infrastructures commissioned to Italian companies, so it was less generous than it seemed. And in change, Libya would withhold these migrants at the shore, would give access to the Italian oil company to their oil fields, right? Now, who do you think was unhappy about it? Someone just went to prison. Who was unhappiest? I heard the word. Which countries? France was unhappy, Britain was unhappy, Belgium was unhappy, Holland was unhappy. Why? Even Portugal was unhappy. Why?
Interrupted the oil.
Well, it's not interrupted. So first of all, the idea that colonialism is wrong and that repayments need to be done, it's a little tricky for those countries that had colonies, right? Imagine your colonies, former colonies are asking the same, right? That's not the principle we want to be established. Secondly, oil. And Shell, BP, they all wanted their own share, right? Plus, French former President Sarkozy just went to prison 3 days ago. Sarkozy had, as we now know, gotten money from Gaddafi for his electoral campaign. Plus, he needed to intervene in Mali. So he needed some sort of cover up. So what about we move war to Libya? So Sarkozy and the other idiot, Blair, move war to Libya. After 3 days, they don't even have enough ammunition anymore. They actually lose their spies in the desert. The Italians had to go and take them out of the desert. Not only they lost them with the little suitcase, with everything, right? And therefore, the US got in, right? And they grabbed Italy by the air. That was suasion made by the then president of the Republic, Napolitano, who I hope is frying in hell at that point. And that was a huge mistake, because of course, you kill Gaddafi, but Libya does not magically become a democracy. It's actually currently still a failed state, currently divided into two parts. Major influencer in Libya are Turkey and Russia, so not exactly a victory for West. And most of all, no more oil and gas. Where does Italy and other countries get their oil and gas if Libya is out of the picture? Russia. I mean, it's math. You either get on one side or you get on the other one. I mean, there's no alternative. So it increased dependence on Russia, which particularly unnerved some people in the Obama administration. A name, Victoria Nuland. So I haven't been in one single meeting with Victoria Nuland where she wouldn't start, when is Italy going to decrease its dependence on Russian oil and gas? This is in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. So this is a little bit far back, right? And every time we're like, well, we need cheap oil and gas. We are energy dependent. Can't really dictate us where we buy our gas, right? And now, Obama ended. First Trump arrives, first Bush arrived. Biden, one and only, arrives. And how was Biden? We don't know. I mean, COVID made perception very difficult. What we know for sure is that he got a number of veterans from the Obama administration, installed them in foreign policy, because his clear goal was domestic policy. He was especially worried, with a reason, about the Supreme Court and the